I'm not getting up to turn the lights on, but I was watching a video on YouTube about Fuel Saver, and they have one called Fuel Shark. I looked at the schematic and I'm like, all it does is light up an LED. All it does, of course, the whole concept is like, how do you, if you could use a capacitor to improve fuel economy, how would you do it? It's obviously not load on the engine. It's all about, well, in a sense, it is load on the engine, but simply removing the alternator isn't going to do much. So I was looking at, since I know a lot about escapements for watches, the alternator attached to a capacitor is similar to a balance wheel and a hairspring. At least a capacitor in general is just similar to a balance wheel and a hairspring. Very similar. You know, it charges in one side, returns the energy, and then you put a little bit more in there from the main spring. It locks and unlocks and distributes energy in an efficient manner, as efficiently as possible, ideally. So, using that ideology in an engine, and the only way is electromechanical, if you're going to use a capacitor, obviously, which then you're just using a hybrid. But how do you do it purely mechanical? I'm not entirely certain how the flywheels in the hybrid prototype series work. I know it's just basically curves, whatever they call it, dynamic energy recovery, something like that. And all you need is a flywheel attached to the drivetrain with a differential. And so the differential distributes energy from the flywheel back into the drivetrain. Ideally, right? Well, the whole point with that is that if you have an engine with high torque, you can spin a flywheel, right? And you can spin extra mass that can be distributed through a differential that isn't putting excess load on the engine without, well, at least in a time of need. So say if you have let's see, my Jeep, I drive at 1100 RPM to 2000 usually. I rarely push the engine more than that, because it'll just drive itself with torque, and you just let that engine basically idle, and it'll just put you around. Well, the engine always has excess torque. No matter how I drive it, it's usually burning the same amount of fuel. No matter how much weight I have inside the Jeep, it'll perform identical, essentially. So say it only takes like half your torque to just get going, right? But you're burning the same amount of fuel if you had a flywheel attached to the drivetrain or the camshaft. Is it a camshaft? Anyway, whatever drives the pistons, right? So then yeah, you just have a differential and you're using that extra torque to rotate a flywheel that then can discharge its stored energy. No, it's no different than a prototype that charges a battery with kinetic energy. That's from your brakes, I think, curves is. I'm talking about DES, dynamic energy, DER, recovery, whatever it is. So, is it practical? Who knows? And cars, the whole point would be that you would have this wheel that then, as the engine senses less load, then it lowers its fuel and slowly extracts some stored mechanical energy from a flywheel to help spin the drivetrain and the pistons. And so it's just like a mechanical turbo, I suppose, for compression. But how does that equate to less fuel? How are you going to use less fuel and still maintain this? Well, if you then shut off, say, 1 or 2 pistons, you have a 6-cylinder, so then you shut off 1 or 2, it would sound like a misfire. But the flywheel is compensating for those 2 pistons to keep the engine still cycling. And so then it would pulse, charging the flywheel and keeping your momentum going. And that's the whole point of that whole thing and why I made this video. So in terms of using a capacitor, you could probably, if just like charging the LED, put a little bit of that extra electricity if there is an excessive amount of electricity from an alternator, if you could have a more efficient alternator, I suppose. One that, and then you could use the extra voltage in the modern age. I mean, my alternator is fucking ancient considering what technology can do now. And how light load can be to generate enough charge to charge your battery and run your system without draining the battery. But and it still have to be electromechanical. You can't just plug something into your cigarette thing. It's just gonna oh man, I can't believe people are falling for that. If they are, I'm sorry for you. But so that's, I don't know, I just woke up. But it always goes back until, just think about it like a watch, right? How, if instead of a balance wheel attached to a hairspring that reciprocates locking and unlocking, that you would, because if you shut off the mainspring's energy to the hairspring, it'll still fall until it dies out. And they're very efficient too, so they'll do that for a good while if they don't have any resistance from locking and unlocking. And so just imagine just spinning, right? So it spins, hits a point, it could keep spinning, but now the main spring, which is our fuel, would be, instead of the arbor hitting an escapement wheel, it would tick the balance wheel one more time. Just like a merry-go-round, right? So you're operating a merry-go-round and you're spinning this thing. And it can spin as long as it wants. Go back to, well, this is no different. I used to, with my Mini Cooper, which coasted really well, and the thing coasted so well, I would flutter the pedal. I would get a lot more gas mileage. So I would take it up to speed, I would coast. And it would coast really well again. And then as I slowed down, then I'd do it again. And then you do this, and then you use hills and stuff too, so that you can store energy, get up the next hill. without burning more fuel to do so. And that works really well too. Just like those, they were doing a competition in Canada, I read about, where they're getting thousands of miles a gallon. They're doing that exact same thing, so they'd go 20, and they have to average at 15 to drop it down to 9, speed back up to 20, and then they can coast a long way. It's just like lifting up a bucket of water, having a 0.1 degree, negative 0.01 degree, incline, and the water will flow across the entire country practically. So, getting better fuel economy. Is the flywheels viable? If you look at it in the sense of just shutting off a few pistons, and it compensates for that, yeah. These engines that can shut off certain pistons and things, because at that point, why not just disconnect the pistons and just run one piston? So it's pointless anyway, just tacking something on to the engine, because there's always a simpler means. Because at the end of it, that's what you're doing. You're looking at how to connect this flywheel to the wheels themselves. But thanks to the friction of the wheels, there's going to be a whole lot of torque in that flywheel, which is why they work really well for charging batteries in a moment for racing. And Priuses have that too. They use the heat from brakes. I don't think they have flywheels. Maybe Teslas have flywheels now. I don't know, but how to get better gas mileage without destroying internal combustion.